Welcome, everyone. We're glad that you're joining us here today. This is a special edition of our live, where usually we're talking about the new and the next, but now the new and the next seems to be every day. So today we're excited to have Nancy Siegel here with us, and Nancy is going to be talking about federal jobs and how we can help our clients apply to federal jobs, because it is different than applying in the private sector. So thanks for joining us here today, Nancy.
Thanks for having me, Marie. I am passionate about federal employment. The feds are the largest employer in the country. So not thinking about federal employment to me is a real mistake on the part of individuals and resume writers to steer their clients in that direction. They are still real jobs with benefits and good long-term employment prospects, etc. So it's an area ripe for employment.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that sector. And I was just looking today at USAJOBS, and there were 7,700 jobs that said open to the public, and then a whole bunch of other categories, which I'm sure you'll help us into a little bit more today. But one of the mistakes people often make is thinking that those are all in DC. So where does the federal government hire?
The federal government hires positions around the world, literally. There are 2 million federal employees, and that does not count military. So we're talking 2 million civilian employees. 80% of federal employees are outside of the Washington, D.C. area. You know, we think about DC as the center of the federal universe, but in fact, from an employment standpoint, actually the opposite is true. There are huge numbers of federal employees in places like Colorado, California, Texas, Alabama, Florida, New York, Chicago, and of course the DC, Maryland, Virginia metro area, but that's only 20% of the jobs.
Yeah, so they're everywhere. And what types of jobs? So what industries or roles? Obviously, industry is federal, but there's a lot of different types of jobs. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So there's jobs ranging from financial analysts to communication specialists to electricians and cooks. Really, the government hires everything. There are even manufacturing plants in the federal government. Think about, and granted, there's not tons and tons of these, but the government has manufacturing plants that actually make money, literally, coins and bills. And they're like real traditional plants. And then you've got electricians, you've got housekeepers. I mean, think about the VA. And to maintain those 900 VA hospitals and another 1,100 VA medical clinics, you've got everything from housekeepers to dietitians to nurses and doctors and social workers and schedulers. And that's before you get to law enforcement, which is everywhere with every agency, census takers, right? Somebody has to review those SBA loans, the PPP loans that you talked about with William Arruda that many people on this call might be thinking about applying for. So there's loan reviewers and approvers. There's even collectors for those who don't pay. You've got folks at the Department of Education. You've got emergency management specialists. You've got health people. You've got a lot of epidemiologists. You're soon going to have people tracing, I forget what they call them, disease tracers or whatever the proper term is. I mean, if your clients do it, so does the federal government.
Yeah, it's almost like a big corporation and it's spread out all over the country, and it hires almost every type of person that we could think of.
Absolutely.
And we don't think about it because our client maybe hasn't worked in the government, but that doesn't mean that they can't, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And unlike the private sector, where there is, of course, illegal age bias, the federal government demographically trends about 15 years older than people in the private sector. And many people come back to the federal government or enter the federal government as a second or third career. So the fact that you had a prior life somewhere is not at all an impediment. It is the expectation. So lots and lots of choices without having to worry about the age of your client or the age of the applicant.
So let's talk a little bit about what's different. And maybe let's start with, where do we find these jobs? What is the number one, number two place to find these types of jobs?
The number one and number two and number three place to find these jobs is USAJOBS.gov. Now, that houses 90% of federal job postings. So one of the things people come to me and say all the time is, oh, I know someone, they're going to help me get a federal job. That's a huge mistake because, again, 90% of federal jobs go through USAJOBS.gov. And the person you know cannot really help you until you have gotten past the HR gatekeepers. Okay, so please do not ever yourself or encourage a client to purchase the secret federal job market list, because really anything like that is just an aggregator and it points you back to USA Jobs as well. I see federal jobs posted on LinkedIn. There too, most of them will point you back to USA Jobs. There are a few exceptions, but on balance, that's where you should go.
Yeah, and people could research what organizations or types of federal employment is local so that they can search the right keywords and search for the specific organization on usajobs.gov. But most likely they'll still have to go there to apply, even obviously if the organization is local. In Colorado, like you were just saying, there's a lot of federal agencies hidden in the mountains there in Colorado, and you might research which ones those are, and some of them post their own jobs on their own sites and then also on USA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So federal jobs are required to be posted if they are in what is called the competitive service. That's a federal regulation. There are some jobs, like in the intelligence community, which are in what is called the accepted service. That's EX, not ACC. Those jobs are not required to be posted on USA Jobs, but they're posted. And so again, you can go to an individual agency website. If you're interested in the intelligence community, the CIA has a website. They get 10,000 applications a month. If you don't hear from them, don't call them. They'll call you, right? So really going through USA Jobs is huge. As you said, you saw 7,700 jobs today open for people who'd never worked for the government before. What's important, no one wants to scroll through 7,700 jobs or frankly, even 100 jobs. So USA Jobs has a search agent feature where you can enter criteria ranging from the title of the job, the salary of the job, the agency of the job, the location of the job. So thinking about setting up a search agent in USA Jobs is huge. And I would encourage you to absolutely do that. And you can have multiple search agents in USA Jobs. And as you start to see what your results are, you can fine tune your search criteria. The one thing I would encourage people to do, oh, great, thank you for bringing that up. The one thing I would encourage you to do is have USA Jobs send you applications every single day. So USA Jobs, you can set it up to send you to you every 2 weeks, once a week, every day, every couple of days. Because the average federal job gets anywhere from 400 to 1,000 or more applications, many agencies are trying to narrow the window of openings. And so you really want to make sure you are looking at USA Jobs every single day.
Well, and this is, I liked this. As I said, I was just scrolling here. We're open to the public, and then we're not going to get into all of these details today. This is a whole class on what all of these things mean, but it's important to know what you're qualified for. And of course, that's some of the research that people can do. But then I'm just scrolling down here to see the most urgent hiring needs. Gives you a pretty good range of what types of people are they hiring right there. And then, as you said, it walks you through how to set up a search and a profile. They've got pretty good directions here on how a job seeker can get started.
Yeah, it's a pretty robust site, actually. Is it the most user-friendly in the world? Probably not in real life, but there's a lot of content there. In addition, USA Jobs, if you go to usajobs.gov, just the general, right at the top is they have structured it for just, see, you can see it right there. We're hiring, help us respond to COVID-19. They've set up a separate website as part of USA Jobs just for that response. So there's lots of jobs there as well. And so they've done a good job at trying to direct folks. The COVID-19 jobs, obviously, the response will be much quicker than it will be just generally.
Right, and that's one of our points today. Okay, so let's say that we're on here and we're searching and we're just trying to figure out what we want to apply to find a position. Why are federal resumes different than what we might use to apply to a company?
So I think something that's really critical, two things I want to say that are critical. One is USA Jobs, and this is grossly misunderstood, is not an applicant tracking software system. Real people review every single person's resume who applies.
Yeah, so that just kind of blew me away. In our federal resume class a couple of years ago, and you told me that, I was like, whoa, it's not an applicant tracking system. However, as we're going to get to this next, it still matters that every single term and word is in the resume, even though it's not an applicant tracking, right?
Absolutely, and that is point 2. Unlike the private sector, where there are a lot of assumptions and drawing of conclusions by reviewers of resumes, from a federal HR standpoint, and the federal HR people are in fact the gatekeepers. From a federal HR perspective, if it is not overtly written on your resume, you did not do it. So a great example, I often get calls from people with titles like assistant vice president, director, pretty significant titles, chief, whatever. And I say to them something along the lines of, well, do you supervise anybody? And I can almost see them on the other end of the phone sort of puffing up and, sticking their chest out. And they say to me, well, of course I do. Didn't you see my title? And, my response is, If it's not in your resume, you didn't do it. So no one's going to make an assumption that your fancy title means something in and of itself that the rest of us are supposed to get. And this is why federal resumes are typically 4 to 6 or 7 pages. Now, I know every college career coach and probably most resume writers are twitching when I say 4 to 7 pages. But
that's a lot of work.
Yes, it is a lot of work, but you can put away your thesaurus. You can let go of your pretty graphics, because the federal HR people are looking to see that you are qualified. And a job posting, one of the things that I love about federal job postings, as much as they make me roll my eyes back in my head, is that they are a roadmap to exactly what the HR people are looking for. So if you really hone in on those postings and focus in a few key areas, you know exactly what needs to go in the resume. And that's a gift.
Yeah, the postings, whereas you might find a posting on Monster and it has, 4 bullets, these postings spell out exactly what you need to speak to, and they want you to use their words, which makes it very much like writing for an applicant tracking system, right? Because they're doing the same thing. They're looking for those exact qualification, those exact words, and that's really our job as the writers, to make the match translate, if our person's moving into government, translate into that language.
Right. If the job posting calls it cybersecurity and they spell it with 2 words, spell it with 2 words. I don't care if you like it with 1 word. Let it go. This isn't about you. This is about meeting the requirements and meeting the expectations of the federal HR people. If you have 1,000 applications to review, as often happens in cybersecurity, and thank you, Virginia, for that nice note, if you have 1,000 applications to review, you want your life to be easy. And that means giving the HR people exactly what they ask for. Don't get cute. Don't get clever. Don't show off your vocabulary. This is not about that. It's not about you. It's not about telling people what you want to tell them. It's about telling them what they want to see.
Now, we're still using accomplishments, right? And I
Absolutely.
know that in the federal government, you call it a CCAR. Tell us
Yes.
what that.
So there are similarities, of course, between federal resumes and private sector ones. I still want to see some kind of summary or qualification statement, right? Because if you tell me everything I need to know in that, I don't even have to read those 5 to 7 pages. And boy, am I a happy person. So I still want to see that. I want to see accomplishments using, in a perfect world, the CCAR rubric: context, challenge, action, result. Some of you might be familiar with STAR: situation, task, action, result. PAR: problem, action, result. SHARE: situation, hindrance, action, result. I mean, there's a gazillion acronyms. Doesn't matter. But what did you overcome? What was the challenge? What did you do? And what was the result? So this is, if those of you who might have clients who are aspirational or applying for the senior executive service, you are absolutely positively required to use the CCAR rubric. So my view is start now. Get in the habit, get your clients in the habit, because CCAR is the right way to answer an interview question as well. It's how employees should be writing their self-assessment or their accomplishment accomplishment report as part of their performance management process. So it's a great rubric.
Now, when you do that, us resume writers, we like to lead with the result in our bullet. Is that still okay, or do you want to write in that flow?
So I don't think it's horrible if you start with the result, right? I get it. And, depending how it's framed, actually the result could be part of the challenge, right? Overcame or turned around a poor performing project, after months of languishing, brought it in on time, on budget. Now, the challenge to me is turned it around, right? It was languishing, but arguably that's part of the result as well.
Yeah. And then we're going to include the keywords that we need to include in those statements, for making things
absolutely.
The skills or the action. Yeah.
And metrics. Let's not forget metrics. Metrics, numbers are so critical for context. If you tell me that you managed a budget, I don't know whether it's $1 budget, a $10,000 budget, or $100 million budget. So that's something that's very similar to a private sector resume, as is, I don't want to know what you did in 1975. Please do not be one of those people, and don't let your clients be one of those people that's still talking about their high school football touchdown and they're 60. Come on, haven't you done anything since? So, those are some real similarities with private sector resumes.
So do you go back any further? So in the private sector, we talk about, go back around 15 years. Sometimes I'll go back a little further because I don't like to make my client look too much younger than they really are. There's some middle ground there. How far do you usually go back in a federal resume?
So I typically go back in the 10 to 12 year range. Now, I have people, like I'm sure everybody on this call does, that cannot let it go, right? They still want to talk about how they saved the world in Katrina. Okay, that's in history books, or what they did 30 years ago because it was fabulous. And I'm sure it was. I mean no disrespect. It's the same thing with the folks who want to put Eagle Scout on their resume and they're 50, and I'm like, dude, come on. So what I do for clients like that, and very similar, I'm sure, to what you're doing, I say something along the lines of earlier professional work experience and achievements. And then I might list a couple of relevant jobs with no dates and a couple of achievements. And I say to people all the time, if you don't have achievements that match those, why do you think somebody cares about this? Because that's what you're selling, is your achievements. That's your differentiator. What makes you better or different than the people sitting on the other side of your cubicle wall that are doing exactly the same thing?
Yeah, and then I know the formatting is a little bit different because we're not going to use some of the graphics, etc. But we still want it to be easy to read. We want it to be easy to skim. So what are the things that people do need to be thinking about in their format?
So you need to let go of all of your modern fonts. Okay. Nobody cares, honestly, if it's in Calibri or not, if you're using a sans serif font, because the standard government font, now hold on for those of you who can't stand this, the standard government font is Times New Roman. 12.
That's a serif font, right?
Right. And those of you who are still using Courier, it is time to let that go.
Wait, but now it could be the new modern then.
So Times New Roman. If your clients are using the USAJOBS resume builder, it does not accept fancy formatting. It does not accept bold. It does not accept underline. It does not read italics, any of that business. So what I recommend for USAJOBS resumes is capitalization of the keywords. And so if I'm writing content about supervising people, so lead and direct a diverse team of 10 geographically dispersed employees, I would put all of that in caps and then have the rest of the description in regular type. Plan and assign work, provide feedback, coach and mentor. So unlike the private sector where we're really tied to short, tight bullets, you got 5 pages. Tell me what I want to know.
Yeah, we still want it to be to the point. We don't want to ramble, and we don't want to use a whole bunch of adjectives. I'm guessing we don't want to fluff it up. We can include all the details.
Right. In a way that you would never do on a private sector resume, because those details are assumed.
Yeah, and as long as we're using plain fonts, I'm guessing we could use Arial or Calibri if we think it's easier to read, but it just does. We don't need to get too worried about it.
You don't need to worry about it, but it's the government. Humor them.
Yeah.
The world will not come to an end with Times New Roman.
And it's interesting because the all caps people are afraid in some ways to use that because it's yelling, but that's the only tool that we have in this type of resume.
Right. So the USAJOBS builder is quite controlled, and it's quite controlled, and you really want to make sure that you humor the builder. And nobody wants, and we've all gotten stuff off the internet with weird symbols and funky numbers, like right in the middle of everything. And we don't want our resumes to look like that. We want our resumes to show like they look in a Word doc. And so don't get upset about the capitals. I understand the screaming part, but that really helps. If the resume is 5 pages long, the HR person can skim those 5 pages and focus their attention on those capital letters. And they're going check, check, check. They see everything they need.
And we're still using short paragraphs. So I would say, short paragraphs, usually we say no longer than 4 lines today because people just don't have we're not used to reading blocks more. And then do you use bullets or not, or just short paragraphs?
I generally don't. But if you use bullets, if you feel better and want to put your accomplishments in bulleted form, rather than using a traditional bullet, which sometimes gets funky in the builder, I would use a plus sign with a space after it, because it's, you're bulleting the list, but we know that the formatting won't cause a problem.
Okay, so we're paring that down. We're still writing concisely, not filling a bunch of adjectives, short paragraphs or short bullets with the symbols, and then use the all caps to draw the eye, similar to what we would do with bold.
Right. So the key thing here is it's not going to be as short as I know, and I'll answer that question in just a minute, Virginia, but it's not going to be, those paragraphs aren't going to be as short as I know they are in the private sector. Nobody is going to twitch if it's 8 lines. Okay. So too many bullets, you've got to cover all of the keywords. So not just from the announcement itself, but virtually every federal position has an accompanying what is called an occupational questionnaire. And so this is usually a Likert scale questionnaire. There could be 20 questions. And you have to, in your resume, make sure that you answer the questions. And so too many bullets, I would only use bullets for accomplishments, and 1 to 2 per year is fine. If you've got 5 years in a job, I think 3 accomplishments is plenty. If you've got 10 years in a job, then 5 is plenty. You don't need 37 bullets. It's more important to make sure that you show what I call show your work, demonstrate in your resume how you answered the questionnaire, because the questionnaire is the only thing in USAJOBS that is scored through automation. And this is an oversimplification, but anyone who scores 100, their resume kicks out of USAJOBS and then real people read it. And so what the HR people are supposed to do is make sure that the resume backs up the content or the way you answered the questions. And so
the questionnaire might ask like a simple question of, do you have 5 years of experience managing people, right? And then you have to show on the resume explicitly that you have 5 years managing people.
Leverage 5+ years experiencing managing a team, or
right.
So those questionnaires, which are accessible from the vacancy announcement itself, that is something you should always look at before going ahead and applying or encouraging your clients to apply. People come to me all the time and say, I'd be perfect for this. Okay, how would you answer the questionnaire? Here it is. Let's look at. Oh, I'd be perfect. I know I could do this. And so it's not about knowing you can do it. It's about proving that you already have.
Which in any resume we write.
Well, absolutely. People think, well, I have the potential. Well, as a hiring manager, am I going to hire you based on potential? Or am I going to hire you because you have already done what I need done? Hello.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean people can't transition. It just means that that's what they hire a resume writer, is to help them show and demonstrate what they've already done.
So, Virginia, I want to make sure I answered your question about too many bullets. Be good?
Yeah, and one of the things when, Nancy, I'll just ask so in a corporate resume, and I've done this occasionally in a federal resume, I don't write that many. I've learned enough from you to know that I don't write that many. But I have occasionally separated bullets by a all caps header. So maybe someone has leadership accomplishments, and I put 2 or 3 of those under a leadership header and then a operations header, so that I can separate the bullets and make them a little easier to find. Is that okay in a federal resume?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So if you are using the USAJOBS resume builder, and this is something just to keep in mind, the experience block of the builder for each job is 5,000 characters.
Well, that's huge.
Yes, well, that gives you a clue. They're not looking for 3 bullets of 3 lines each.
Right.
Now that's per job.
Wow.
So there's plenty of room. That being said,
if resume writer's going to take on this business, they need to think about that when they're scoping the project, right?
Absolutely. That being said, the longest federal resume I've ever seen, and I am not encouraging this is what I make fun of, was 67 pages with footnotes. Oh my God, footnotes. So we don't need that. Please, edit yourself. That 5 to 7 page limit is where you ought to be. Okay.
So after we apply, what does the process look like?
So in normal times, I tell people 6 to 18 months. 6 to 18 months. So for the COVID jobs, they're moving more quickly. And, for STEM employees or applicants, they're moving more quickly. But it's not like hiring in the corporate sector where you could start tomorrow. Because even for jobs that do not require a formal clearance, they still have to do what's called a NACI, a background check, credit check, those kinds of things. And it's a process. So the goal that the Office of Personnel Management has set for hiring, hold on, is 180 days from soup to nuts.
And for those of us who aren't great at math, that's 6 months, right?
That is 6 months from the posting.
Yeah.
And most agencies have not hit that.
Wow. So people are looking to find a job fast because they're unemployed. They might want to apply to some corporate jobs, some, everyday jobs, while they're also applying to these types of jobs.
Absolutely. Now, if you're applying to work for the Census Bureau, if you're applying for one of these COVID jobs, it will move more quickly, but it's still not going to happen next week. So the resume builder, if some agencies actually require that you use the resume builder in USAJOBS. And you'd hate to find that out at 11:59 p.m. on the closing date, because that's not enough time to put your stuff in the resume builder. I don't always use the builder, but I format a Word document in the same way that the builder looks, so that even if I don't use the builder, the HR people know exactly where to look to find information they want to see. So my whole strategy in terms of the resume is to make it easy for the HR people. That's my goal.
Yeah, and the idea, it's almost like the ASCII resumes, the text-only resumes that we teach, and now we don't really do them that often, but this sounds pretty similar to that.
Exactly. So, if you can't get past the HR people, the people can't help you. I hear from folks over and over again, I'm in that job and my resume didn't get to the hiring manager. What's wrong? Well, you didn't take the time to do this right. You made an assumption that because you're sitting in this job, that you'd automatically be eligible and qualified for the promotion. Well, you know what they say about assumptions.
Right. It's more than any other job is that you've really got to show it.
Yes, absolutely. You've got to show it. And it takes time. Now, I recommend you can follow up, not the day after the job closes, but every job posting at the very end has a contact person. And if you haven't heard anything within, let's say, 3 weeks of the close date, reach out to the contact person. That being said, check your email first, because when you set up your USAJOBS profile, they will ask you if you want to be notified as your application moves along. And so check that before you get on the phone, because you don't want to hear, well, did you check your email? Right. So, but I'd say 3 weeks after the close date, if you haven't heard anything, you don't have an email, just pick up the phone and ask for a status.
Yeah, so we can still follow up. And you said earlier that, someone's not going to be able to get you in, but there's still a role for networking in this process, right?
Absolutely. and several people might be eligible for what's called non-competitive hiring. And I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But if you have a client who is eligible for non-competitive hiring, then they should be networking like crazy. They should still have a resume that is in the federal style that supports their qualifications, but networking is huge for that.
Yeah, and it helps us find out the opportunities, find out what other agencies maybe we should be searching for or targeting.
Absolutely.
A lot of benefits to networking that may not be, hey, you're going to fast track through the hiring process. But
correct.
You might be aware of other things that you weren't aware of before.
Right. And like everything else, everybody wants to hire someone they know or someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone. Exactly. So Kimberly, thank you for that question. There actually is a gremlin, I call it a gremlin, in the USAJOBS system. It is a random, intermittent, occasionally happening gremlin. Is that enough caveats there? There are some times when resumes that have been uploaded to the system do not flow to HR. This is random. I have had it happen to clients. I generally do encourage people to put their resumes into the builder for just that reason. And some of the things we've talked about, like a skills summary or other kinds of things, the builder does not have a place for. So there is a place in the USAJOBS resume builder called additional information. And this is 20,000 characters of free space. Now, it is certainly not necessary to use all 20,000 characters, but if you want to guarantee with no little blips that your resume goes through the system, then using the builder is the way to do that. There's not a ton of situations where the gremlin appears, but it does. And I've actually had it happen to clients. So positions that close and get reposted, there's lots of reasons that happens, Michelle. One reason that could happen is that there were errors in the original posting that had to get cleaned up. And so they have to repost it, because if the HR people have not provided all of the relevant information to the applicant, it's not a clean posting. So sometimes it's to clean up errors. Sometimes it's because a hiring manager didn't have the money, or somebody that they thought was going to leave didn't leave. And then all of a sudden they're gone and they actually have the vacancy. Another reason that could be is, they didn't get any applicants, or they didn't get any qualified applicants, so they're revising it. So there's lots of reasons. State government jobs typically have the same requirements. Well, every state has a different set of rules, as we are learning, with some states reopening and others going no way. So, you really have to check your state. I have certainly successfully used federal style resumes for clients to get state jobs, but some state jobs, they very clearly want a private sector kind of resume. You really have to sort of figure out what that state is looking for. Most states have merit promotion. They have to hire the best qualified person. They shouldn't have political implications or interference. And so making sure you cover everything is the best way to do that.
Well, and so when I worked for Colorado State University, it was a state employer.
Mm-hmm.
And the state jobs there was similar to what you're saying with USAJOBS, where it was a scoring system they lay out the qualifications, and then you score someone based on how they demonstrate those qualifications in their application. So the cover letter had more bearing because in the cover letter, people would detail out how they met each qualification.
Got it.
The resume, it would have a little bit more detail. And like you said, it kind of depends on the type of position and the agency, the state agency that they're applying to, whether you think it would be more of a corporate-like resume or more like a federal resume or somewhere maybe kind of in between.
Right. You know, sometimes with CVs, academic CVs, I do a combination of stuff because there's no content in a real CV, and people really want to know. Let's talk, if we have a moment, about cover letters.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, which I know we preach in the private sector side of the world. Please do not waste my time with a cover letter when applying for a federal job. Since federal jobs typically do not require a cover letter, that means they won't be scored. And oftentimes, since they're not scored, nobody reads them. Now, most federal job postings say you may submit a cover letter. That's not a requirement. In the last 16 years since I retired from being a federal HR person, I have seen a total of 2 job postings that have actually required a cover letter. And of course, when they require it, you need to give it to them. But so reading those job postings carefully is critical. But for most, please don't waste your time or my time. I'm just going to toss it.
That's important to know, that the cover letter, if it says it's required, do it. If it doesn't say it's required for the federal job, not to do it. And you might use that additional info section in the resume.
Perfect.
Right? To put why you're interested or something.
Nobody cares why you're interested.
Right.
Let it go. Let it go. No one cares. Really?
Oh,
Please.
I love that. Now that song, I have toddlers, so the Let It Go song is going to be playing in my head all day.
I could sing, but I think we should pass.
Well, I don't see that we have any more questions, but if you have a question when you're watching the recording, feel free to put it in the chat. If you tag it with recording or say, you know, hey, I'm watching the recording and I have a question, I get notified of all the comments, and I'm happy to reach out to Nancy and either have her answer it here or to share her answer here. So if you're watching the recording, you have a question, feel free to put it here. I'll share it with Nancy. And I'm so glad that all of you are helping your clients to apply to the federal government. And thank you so much, Nancy, for sharing just such a wealth of information in a short amount of time.
Well, thank you, Marie. It's always fun. I love this stuff. I'm just passionate. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, we've got Barbara saying she took so many notes. And then Virginia, thank you for your questions, and glad that people are getting some great information here. So again, feel free to chat in the comments, and I'm sure we'll do this again at some point with Nancy so that she can answer more questions.
Yeah, and we've got our class coming up.
Yeah, we've got our class coming up at the end of May. So we'll be starting the Federal Resume Writer class if you want to start this as a new avenue of revenue for your business.
Right, because the federal government is always there.
Yes, yes.
And always hiring and reasonably recession-proof.
Yes. As you're seeing now with those 7,000 open positions, 7,700 open positions. So
Great.
I'm going to check some of those out, especially the COVID related ones, and see what types of positions they're hiring specific to COVID. So thanks for pointing that out.
Okay. Thank you.
And we'll see you again tomorrow. We'll be talking about getting students hired and have a few recruiters on to talk about what they're doing for on campus, not on campus, recruiting. So thank you again, Nancy, and I'll see some of you again tomorrow.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody, and stay safe and healthy.
Yes, you too, Nancy.